she'll be able to get back up to speed. Thank you both so much for being here tonight, and the show is yours.
All right, well, thank you for that. I'm Phil Gleason. I know it's obligatory in these meetings to say how long you've lived in Cumberland, but I've been here for about 47 or 48 years, although I was not born here, so let me get that out of the way first. And I did have the mostly pleasure of serving on the town council, it was late 80s, early 90s, for 2 terms. I think Bobby was up there with me for some of that time. And
I was across the street with your wife.
oh, that's right, you were on the school board. Right, so those are good memories, mostly. The major accomplishment that happened during that era, and Shirley's dad was heavily involved in this, was the acquisition of the Twin Brook property, which, like a lot of new ideas, was somewhat controversial when it was proposed. Some of that skepticism came from Harlan. But Harlan, to his everlasting credit, came around and decided it was a good idea, and then he got on board big time. And I think it was one of the things that he looked back on with a lot of pride, that it was a really good thing to have done.
He gave it its name, actually.
Right, right. So that's a fond memory. I'm here tonight.
Oh, and
Step right in.
Phil, would you mind just speaking into the mic a little bit more, just for the folks who are at home, because we
Yep.
are recording this. Thank you so much.
So Sarah Russell and I are here tonight, and she'll introduce herself in a moment on behalf of something called the Casco Bay Trail Alliance, which is a sort of loose federation of people who are working to see the Casco Bay Trail adopted, and we'll go into detail on what that trail consists of. But Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Sarah Russell, and as Phil said, happy to be here tonight. Thank you guys for coming early. We really appreciate it. I know it's a lot of time. And working with Phil and many others on the Casco Bay Trail. Excited to share information about it tonight with you guys. I've been here in Cumberland for 20 years. Thanks.
And we thought it would be good to have a workshop first to give people an opportunity to ask questions. Some of you may recall that this project came before you, I think it was 2 years ago about this time. And I happened to be here, not on this project, but on another thing, and I stuck around for it. And I think suffice it to say, the discussion did not really go well, and I can't remember whether it was, the proposal at the time was voted down, or I'm guessing it was probably tabled and not brought back. So we're here to see if we can do better this time around. I think both of us are cyclists. We think this is a good project, not just for the town, but for the region. So we'd like to walk through it. We're going to do a little PowerPoint presentation. Some of this you've probably heard before. Some of it may be new, but as we go, please feel free to stop us and ask questions at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them. And if we don't have answers, we'll see if we can get you those answers. So,
Before you begin, would you mind going into presentation mode just to make it a little bigger? You can either do it at the top, or it's kind of on the bottom right, and I can come over and hit it if you want me to.
I think this might be it right here.
Yeah, slideshow. Yep.
Slideshow.
Perfect.
Oh,
And then you can move around with the arrows.
got
Yep.
it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Yeah.
So the Casco Bay Trail consists of multiple parts. The part that is most relevant to Cumberland is what is called what do we call that portion?
That's the Berlin.
The Berlin Corridor, which is the section that runs from Portland up to
I think I can get a smaller map here.
up to Auburn. Some of this is sort of hard to follow, but it's a 26-mile segment of trail starting somewhere in downtown Portland somewhere near the Rue Institute. Exactly where that trail begins is still tied up in Portland Planning Board and other people who are looking at parking and traffic issues around the Rue Institute. And then it would parallel the old railroad track. I think it was actually a Grand Trunk track as it runs between Route 1 and then in the Cumberland section, Falmouth and Cumberland Middle Road up into Yarmouth. So, and the segment of the trail in Cumberland is a little less than 3 miles. I want to say 2.7.
2.6.
2.6. So if you can envision that corridor, which you can sometimes glimpse from Middle Road, and other times it's sort of invisible, you wouldn't even know it's there. But that's the section that we're.
You can see the town lines there, right in the middle there. Yeah.
And this whole process is really being run by the Department of Transportation, MDOT. And they, at this point in time, are working on multiple trails all around the state of Maine. In other words, this is not their only project. The funding for this project will ultimately come from a combination of state and federal funds. This is where somebody usually says, well, what's it going to cost the town? The answer is we don't know at this point, and we're not asking you to commit to any particular any financial contribution by the town. But I think it's based on everything we know. If the town is asked for some sort of match, it will be modest, and that ask is probably not going to be made for, I don't know, 3 years from now. The long-term horizon on the project is, I think it's possible that construction might happen starting 3 years from now. It could be longer, it could be shorter. And the funding ultimately has to be approved by the legislature. It's possible a bill would be submitted to the legislature this session, the upcoming January session, I guess I should say, but no one is certain about that. So this is not going to happen anytime soon. I'm 76 years old, and one of my ambitions is to ride this trail, so while I still have time. But it's not going to be an overnight project, and there's the DOT is nothing if not process-oriented, and one reason they're seeking support from the towns at an early stage is to make sure that the various towns in the route are on board. And authorizing resolutions of the same sort that we're asking you folks to do have already been passed, and some of our neighbors, I'll get to you, Tig, in just a sec. Falmouth, Yarmouth, North Yarmouth, Pownell, Freeport, and Brunswick have all adopted resolutions at this point. So that's where we are. I'm sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the Berlin corridor is owned by the state, is that correct?
Yes.
Just for the folks at
Yes.
home, thank you.
I think it's fair to say that all of these corridors are owned by the state. So this is state land, but it's not as if the state can do anything they want with it. So at any rate, this is the beginning of a long process. What we would like you folks to do tonight is hear the presentation, ask any questions you want. If there's information that you think you need, we'll do our best to get it for you. And then we'd like to bring it back to a vote on an authorizing resolution, which we'll show you later. It's basically similar to the one that you previously looked at, but I've tweaked it a little bit, I think, to make it more palatable. At that point, I don't think there's going to be a lot of action at this level until the DOT moves forward with next steps. And I'm not exactly sure what those will be. So we're at the beginning of a long journey, and I think it's one that requires everybody to be patient and ask the right questions. And my experience with the state so far, the Maine DOT, is that they're very responsive. They return phone calls and are very good about feeding back information. Let's go to the next one. So that is, where are we now?
That's it, downtown Yarmouth.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So you can see the track in the middle there. It's between Route 1 and I guess that's Middle Road at that point. No, we're going into Yarmouth now, so that's, I'm not quite oriented.
That was down by, in Falmouth.
Yeah,
Phil.
yeah, exactly. So we're just going to give you a couple of views as to what's currently there. I mentioned that earlier, the connection to Portland. And then there's the loop that goes up to Brunswick, which would go through through Yarmouth on that other rail bed into Brunswick. And I think there's a plan afoot to try and improve train service, which starts in Brunswick, and maybe it bypasses Portland. I know there's some discussion over that. I just don't know the details. And this sort of gives you an example. It's a Yarmouth example of how the trail is adjacent to various other public facilities. I think we can keep going. And we've already seen this. That's really the Cumberland section. And I think as I said earlier, I think it consists of just a little under 3 miles. And it's also interesting that as currently on the ground now, there are no public access spots in the town of Cumberland, which I don't think that's either a good thing or a bad thing. And I don't. Nothing that I've heard out of MDOT has suggested that it is something that that they are looking for. So I think that's neither here nor there.
Phil?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. When you say there are no public access points, is there a map somewhere of where there would be the access points to the trail? Everything I've seen so far, it's sort of the big
Well,
picture, but not.
I think the closest one to Cumberland is going to be somewhere in the Bucknam Road intersection in Falmouth. I'm not exactly sure what that is going to look like at this point. So you'd ride up the trail going toward Yarmouth, and I'm not sure exactly what happens in Yarmouth, whether this reroutes onto a bike path along Route 1. There are a couple of ideas that have been floated. I don't know, Bob, do you know?
You're leading kind of where my question is going to go. So I think that one of the things that I want to see happen is the intersection with bus transit.
Right.
And I think of the MDOT lot in Yarmouth, and then right behind that is the park and ride on Route 1 there. And then I'm thinking that there's someplace on Pinelands property, there might be also a facility that was connected to bus service. It seems to me that, if we're looking at big picture issues, we should be thinking about how bikes translate to mass transit, because I think the opportunity of utilizing that for transportation, in addition to bicycling or walking, if somebody rides their bike down Greeley Road, jumps on the trail, and goes to Yarmouth, he can catch a bus, go to Poland, or go north. So I'm hoping that those things are kind of going to turn into play. As far as public access, we do have Powell Road. The town of Cumberland still owns the deeded right-of-way to Powell Road, so there would be an opportunity for us to, at some point, provide access there. Then with the reconstruction of the overpass on Tuttle Road, again, there's opportunities to just talk with the state there as far as planning goes. But I think that those are the kind of my concerns, is that we don't lose sight of other opportunities.
Right, right.
Can I jump in there, Phil?
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. That's a great point. And I think what we're trying to get to here is we're so early in the stages of all of this, and the idea is to try to just get Cumberland on board along with all our neighboring towns to say, okay, let's explore this further. And that's why we want just to answer these questions. But there's so many questions. There's so many things that we don't know the answer to, and the towns are going to be in conversation with the state for years talking about that very thing. So absolutely, interconnectivity with all kinds of public transport is exactly what this trail is encouraged to provide. So, yeah.
All right, let's go to the next. I think
Basic
this is
benefits.
pretty obvious.
It's just background on the
On the RUAC, okay, this is another complicated wrinkle. The state requires that you set up an advisory group, Rail Corridor Use Advisory Council, to move these projects forward. And Cumberland has been part of that group for a couple of years. Actually, Bill Shane was the chair of that group. And the creation of that group was approved by both Cumberland and North Yarmouth back in 2021. That was convened. There was a big meeting at the high school, right, Cheryl? A lot of people there, and a lot of comments taken. And they have issued their draft report, which basically recommends that this project be what they call trail until rail, another complicated term, but what I think it means is it would be a trail, but the option for, and the existing rail tracks would come out, but the option would be preserved by the state to run a new rail line through that same area parallel to the bike trail, presumably a distance apart, at a later date.
if there was demand.
If there was demand. The expense of doing that would be, the word astronomical is often used, it would be state money. And I think at this point, the current thinking of the state is there would be insufficient demand for passenger rail service, say from Auburn to Portland. But, you know, anything's possible. I think it's going to be a matter of funding. And I think that idea is probably one that is going to outlive me. But there is flexibility preserved there. We've talked a little bit about the two routes. I don't know, any questions on this one? Bob, you good? Okay. And just a little more information. I'm not going to read it to you. You can read it yourselves, but some additional comments.
And that's it.
So that's the basic overview. Now, our next handout is a list of frequently asked questions. So we'll sort of walk.
I don't have that up online, though.
Yeah, that was in there. The fact. Oh, that's in your package.
Oh, it's in there, back.
All right, so let me just.
Do you guys need that handout, or do you have it?
Yeah, we don't have that, or at least I
We don't have a hard copy.
No.
We've got
No,
the
we don't.
resolution, but we don't have the FAQ. Thank you. No worries, thanks.
Phew.
Thanks.
Yeah, do you want to?
I think a lot of this is self-explanatory. I'm not going to read it to you, and you've probably heard most of it before. Just seeing if there's anything in here I need to highlight.
Phil?
Yes.
A question. Are these FAQs those same ones from the Casco Bay Trail website?
Yes.
So people at home can
Yeah.
find them there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. They're on the website.
I think the maintenance cost is something that
Yep.
people seem to be very curious about, and these are estimates that the state has given us, $1,000 to $3,000 per mile per year.
Those are maintenance fees.
Maintenance fees. So we would not be in charge of construction or anything like that. It's really just snow plowing and, fixing something that was crumbling in anything. So that's the cost that is estimated to come to us on an annual basis once these trails are built for that 2.6 miles. Yeah.
So plowing is part of the equation, so it is
Yeah.
going to be a year-round trail.
Yeah.
And we may or may not have access from Cumberland, but we'll be responsible to plow it. So how does
Yes.
that work exactly?
We don't know yet.
We don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
We don't have an answer to that one. Didn't mention this earlier, e-bikes would be allowed on this trail, no ATVs, no snowmobiles, which is, again, DOT policy. Any questions on this part?
Horseback?
I don't know. I don't know. I can find out, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
So the maintenance costs, if I was thinking this through, I can't imagine that the town of Cumberland or the town of Falmouth is going to plow their section. To me, that sounds like that would be a contracted service. It would only make sense that,
Yeah, I think the
It's-
towns would probably
yeah.
collaborate on that somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
or the state would,
Or the state would do
contract it
something.
out.
Yeah.
They do the same thing with snowmobile trails up, in the northern part of the state. The state contracts with private groomers, and they groom trails for the state.
Yeah. I think the intention is to try and keep these trails clear, pretty much clear through the winter, so that people can at least walk on them. I think cross-country skiing would be permitted, as I understand it. But I don't think they will be maintained as tracked trails for skiing or anything like that.
So it may be groomed trail then, and
Yeah.
not a plowed trail.
Yeah, something like that. I'm just speculating. On
Right.
that one, I really don't know. Well, let us move then to the resolution that we're asking you to look at and consider adopting at a later date. I think that is in your package. And we just made a this is sort of the canned resolution that we started with from the state, and it's very similar to what other towns have passed. Can we get that up?
I don't know where it is. so I'm
Okay,
sorry.
all right. Because there are a couple of things in there that I wanted to highlight.
Do you want, this is the resolution itself right there.
Yeah. I've added language, and do you guys have the highlighted version?
We do.
Okay, so if you can see the two things that I've highlighted in yellow, we wanted to make a couple of things clear. We wanted to mention the fact that there will be opportunity for input on land use issues, input to the main DOT as part of their process. I had asked the question a while back, is this kind of project subject to, planning board approval in the towns? And the answer that I got back from the guy at the DOT was, I don't think so, but he said, one of the things we do as part of our process is, we really want to make sure that abutters and others who have specific concerns about the impact of the route on their property are addressed. So we wanted to make that part of the resolution. And then the other thing I wanted to say, which again I think is obvious, but it's worth saying, is that the adoption of this resolution does not impose any financial obligation on the town. In other words, that's another issue that is reserved for a later date. But it is a showing of support, and I think given the fact that the other towns, most of our neighboring towns have already adopted similar resolutions, I would urge Cumberland to jump on board and demonstrate that support. And I don't think there's a lot of risk in doing so.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
Yeah, you too.
Well, I'll start out with the resolution. Phil, when we as a council were asked to keep an open mind on this the last time.
Right.
We agreed to look into it further. And your group, the very next week, came out and said we endorsed it, which was absolutely not true. So how do we trust you on this? That's my first issue. Bill Shane has told us repeatedly as a council that when he was appointed chairman, that he went to the rail advisory committee and he came right out the first meeting and said, I tell you right now, this is a done deal. This is not an open mind group. This is right from Bill. Mm-hmm. And that minds were already made up. The one thing I noticed in this package and your other package was, in the same time, not once have you guys mentioned the neighbors. Cumberland has some of the closest, other than maybe around Johnson Road and Falmouth, they have the closest homes to this corridor. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, Phil, from having worked on 295 for over 16 years, not dozens, but hundreds of homeless people that we were finding along the rail corridor. Yeah. Constantly camping, crossing the highway, going to neighbors' homes, none of that's been addressed by any of this. It's not just as cheap as, well, a couple $1,000s a year. We're gonna have to look at public safety. That means buying probably a UTV to get down for rescue. We don't have any public access in Cumberland, so I'm not really sure how we're gonna get some kind of economic value out of this. I think, and don't get wrong, I've been getting holy hell from my buddy Ed Suslovich. Ed's been
I'll bet.
burning up my phone about this. He's a big proponent of it. But, we talked about hunting, because you've got to be so many feet from that, which interferes with the right of the neighbors, all on the Cumberland corridor.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern, I understand.
And the public safety, this thing, it's so invasive to the neighbors in Cumberland, Phil, and real good neighborhood. We've done a good job as a council of respecting the will of the neighborhood, and the will of the neighborhoods, this too, is really from the Yarmouth line to Tudor Road to the Falmouth line, don't want this thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to get a sense from you and Sarah about, what are you going to do to protect the rights of the neighbors? What are you going to do for their normal activities, bringing all these people back and forth in their backyards? I'll just go back to how I started with the resolution. We got stung pretty hard by your committee.
Actually, I was not involved in
I
that
know you were,
presentation, but
it was the committee, and
I agree with you. It could have been done better.
so those are my concerns, Phil and Sarah, and
Yeah, we hear you, and I know it's always challenging to say trust the state, but they've done these projects before. They are, I think, as far as I can tell, very adept at dealing with local issues and addressing local concerns. And I have no doubt that there will be a lot of them, not just in Cumberland, but in other towns along the route. So until I have good reason to believe otherwise, I'm gonna say with some confidence that, you know, those issues will be addressed during the course of the approval process. I mean, they have to go through a design review, and, you know, there will be many opportunities to address concerns of abutters and others. You know, public safety, I think, is a real issue. I would guess we would end up doing some sort of compact agreement with Yarmouth and Falmouth, possibly. But exactly how those things will work at this point, I don't think, well, I certainly don't have an answer, and I'm not sure anybody else does. But we certainly hear you, and we're here doing this a little more slowly than it was done 2 years ago, just so we can make sure that we're listening to local concerns and taking those into account before we take next steps.
And don't think, Phil and Sarah, that my questions or criticism, you two bring a lot of credibility to this thing for me, but I just have so many concerns about what the impact it's going to have, and it's not all positive on us. So,
Right.
thank you for your time.
Understand. Sarah, you had.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Mike. I'd love to address that too. So, absolutely, I think that the word of the abutters is something that I would love to help work with Phil and talk and help work through CBT and have pull together the neighbors. Like I said, we're so early in this. This is so introductory. But if we could have some meetings with the abutters, call and sit around this table and talk to the neighbors about concerns and really bring that back to CBT and to the state and everything. I want to assure that, you know, having homeless people walk down those trails is horrible for the neighbors and abutters, but it's horrible for the town too. Nobody in our town is looking to create that sort of environment. So if that's something that we think these trails might encourage, then we are going to find a way to make sure that that doesn't happen. I do know that in other parts of the country where rails have turned into trails, you've heard all of this stuff, but it increases home values exponentially because it just lifts up the whole community. So I think actually turning it from a very abandoned trail way into a well-used pathway increases the safety, and the population of movement will actually probably decrease the existence of vagabonds and such in that. But to your point, if I lived next to those trails, that would be a big concern of mine too. So finding a way to work with the abutters as this process goes down is of great concern for everybody. So we would love to play an active role in that. And then, you know, I just want to say, like, you know, the access to Cumberland, might not give us the economic value, but being able to be a part of the corridor, I think we have to, I'd love us to consider providing for the greater good of this entire area and state. And we have a very small corridor, but working with our neighbors to help encourage the development of something bigger than just us. I'd love for us to sort of, I know it might not provide for Cumberland that economic piece if we don't have any access points there, but I think being part of something bigger is a really big consideration as well. So, and I think that's all I'm going to say there. So thanks, Mike.
I think one thing we could ask the state to do is maybe convene an early meeting with neighbors and abutters down here so that people could come and talk direct, and the state, the young man who's dealing with at the state level is very responsive and very knowledgeable. And if we could get him down here for, you know, just an early meeting so that people could talk to him directly about their concerns, I think that might be helpful, and that could presumably take place sooner rather than 3 years out. So,
Phil, as a council, we asked part of this advisory group that there'd be a representative from the neighbors.
yep.
And that was pretty much universal on the council at the time, was we
Yeah.
want to have input from the neighbors, and that request to have an abutter, a neighbor, part of the advisory committee was turned down, so.
Yep. Well, we can give it
I know
another.
it's not you, Phil,
We can
but-
give it another shot, so, and happy
Thank
to,
you.
happy to do that.
So just sort of going off of Councilman Eads' questions about sort of, you know, the distance between the trails and homes and all that, you know, this seems like, and it says in the notes there, you know, it's pretty much like the Eastern Trail. Is there any information on the Eastern Trail and sort of how that has changed or dealt with, you know, the same sort of issues? Because it's just same sort of trail, different location proposed, and there are some pretty close houses on different parts of the Eastern Trail.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. I've ridden the Eastern Trail a couple of times over the years, not recently. As you know, there are places there, particularly along Route 1 in Saco, for example, where you have to get off the trail, ride a bike path along a road, or Route 1, it's probably Route 1, for a mile or so, and then get back on the trail.
But even like down in Scarborough Marsh area, you know, you can barely even throw a rock and hit somebody's window.
Right.
Kind of thing. You know, it's that close down
Right,
there.
right. I don't know, there's probably some neighbor experience down there that would be worth asking about and seeing how that's gone, so.
We will get back to you on that. We
Yeah,
will call.
we'll see what we can find
We'll
out.
call Eastern Trails and talk to them about that issue.
I think that would help for just, you know,
Yeah.
knowledge of it's relatively similar, and you know, it's not somewhere else in the country that has a completely different makeup and all that. And then the other question was, with the access, when would we have a chance to sort of have our input to the state of access points, you know, and different types of access points, whether it is a, you know, I don't know where we do this, but, you know, a parking lot access point, or just a, you know, trail off of a road access point where you can ride down Greeley Road or ride down Tuttle and pop on without having to, you know, go all the way down to Falmouth or all the way up to Yarmouth.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. You know, when in the process could we have some input on that?
I don't know. I would hope early. That part of their process, the sort of approval process and local concerns, I'm guessing is probably a couple of years off on their schedule. But again, what I would like to do is take back what I've heard tonight to the MDOT and say, you know, there's some concerns here that it would be very helpful if we could at least address earlier than usual and see if we could get some answers, and would you be willing to come down and have a public meeting with abutters and others? And I would expect the answer to that would be yes, so.
I think my reservations last time was the unanswered part about keeping the rail line as a viable resource. And I think that I've come to the realization that I do not have a viable rail line anymore. You know, that desire, you know, so I'm focusing more on providing rail transportation here off of Stiles Way. The economic and the physical, the health benefits, I mean, if we list the benefits of a trail anywheres, you know, it's not a hard leap to find support for that. And so I certainly have more support today than I had 2 years ago, because I think that I realize that I'm not going to have a rail line there, a passenger rail line there. So you have my support there, but I think to go a step further, I think that, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from you and Sarah, but I think there has to be a little bit of demonstration on somebody's part of there's rail to trail all across the country where there's been conversions, and certainly in close proximity to homes. And I think that, you know, if we have a little bit of see how they handled that. You know,
Yep.
how do they mitigate the use of or the the illegal use of it. I'm not worried about crime in Cumberland. I think that nobody's going to walk out from Poland on a rail line to vandalize somebody in Cumberland because there's too many opportunities in Portland to go that far. But I think there is some certain concern on the part of the neighbors to make sure that we mitigate, as best we can. And we see what neighbors do when they don't like a project. They vote it down.
We have,
But anyways, I do support it. I think that we can work through some of the concerns, certainly the concerns of the abutters. I believe we have a viable legal access point, if not 2 points of access, and those things ought to be explored too while before we get too far down the road, particularly with the reconstruction of the overpass on Tuttle Road. Those conversations should be happening while the design phase is going on.
Well, let us see if we can get some early answers out of the DOT on this, and ideally get an early meeting so that they could hear directly from abutters and other people who have particular concerns. I mean, we don't control the DOT, but they're anxious that we.
And I don't think these concerns are unique to Cumberland either.
No, they aren't. They aren't. And yes, I can completely understand why it would be nice not to have to wait 3 years to get answers to some of these questions when, to use a metaphor, the train has already left the station. So,
Phil, do you know what the corridor, how wide it is? Do you know, Shirley? Or-
It's like, I don't think it's much wider than this. I don't know.
No, the
exact-
whole,
The right of way.
The legal right,
the right-of-way for the whole right-of-way width.
probably 100 feet.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh,
Well,
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I don't know the answer either.
I don't know, it's, it's
I know what
state
year they
land,
got
but-
it. 1948, they got the right of way, but I don't know how wide it was. I could go back and look at the deed.
yeah, there was probably a deed from the state, or to the state.
1948,
Yeah, yeah.
Because it
we
was all
can-
part of Sturdivant land, it was one of the Sturdivants
Right.
that gave them. And there was actually, in Cumberland, there was actually a staging area to build some of the track further up north.
Huh, wow,
That was on Henry Sturdivant's land, I think.
yeah. Who owned on the other side,
A point of historical note, the Grand Trunk Railroad went up Stiles Way and Valhalla, crossed across the gravel pit, came out on 115, crossed over to 115 and came up through, I forget the fellow's name, but he did a subdivision down on Greeley Road some years ago, just below you. Scott.
oh, Scott Kerr.
It went up through Scott Kerr's property, and that was the old Grand Trunk Railroad bed, and then they changed it because they couldn't make the grade. But Valhalla Road was actually the Grand Trunk bed.
if you say so. You got me there.
Sorry, 1853, Ephraim Sturdivant to Henry Sturdivant, and land for railroad gravel was mentioned,
Okay.
1853.
I have it's a comment, but also a question. Looking at the resolution, the last snippet here, resolved that the town of Cumberland petitions the Commissioner of Transportation and the Maine State Legislature to permit the conversion of the trail, as recommended. So upon signing this, we're agreeing to the whole thing. It's not just like an endorsement, like we think this is a good idea. It's, you're ready, you're going through it. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's yes, it's a statement in support of the project. We wanted to make sure that it didn't commit the town to spend any money, and that's why we added exculpatory language on that. Beyond that, I'm not sure, legally it does anything except express our current intention.
Will we know at some point soon if they've secured whatever federal or state funding they're wanting for this? Or is it reliant on grants? At what point do
The-
we know what
I-
our piece would be?
I think my best guess on that is if a bill is submitted to the legislature for the January term, that bill might draw some preliminary funding. The body language is it's probably not going to be ready for the January, for 2025, that it's probably not going to be submitted until 2026. But, you know, that can change tomorrow. It's just hard to sit here and predict what the legislature is going to do and MDOT. I mean, you know, we're a piece of a larger puzzle is what I'm saying.
Phil, one thing here. So Denise, just to answer your question, like if you look at paragraph 5 there, whereas authorizing an interim trail use is only the first step, enable additional planning. So we put in all of those things in the resolution in order to say, this is just okay, check, let's continue the conversation.
Okay.
So there are those other terms in there to help out with that.
Okay, sounds good. I'm not a very trusting person when
I
it
know.
comes to,
I
you
know,
know,
and-
the government and the
and we're-
state. So I'm just, yes, I know the intention is there and that's cool. I'm just wondering, once you say the magic words, is it like, so yeah, I got what I needed and, you know.
You know,
So,
we're not trying to
just
be
checking.
we're not trying to be cute or glib, but, you know, we
Right.
don't really know much more than you guys do about how the process is going to work.
Okay, thank you for all that you do know. I appreciate it.
I would say on that, as a final part of your kind of dialogues with the DOT, 3 years is a long time in government, right? You have different people, you have new administrations, people come and go. And I think that from a process perspective, an education perspective, a communication perspective, if we can incur on them, that we would love a lot of transparency in that and understanding who to go to for what. Because when we do have issues come up, especially with residents and their concerns, it's a state project, but yet, of course, we know that it's also, the consequences are local, right? And so
Right.
if we do have folks who are coming to council meetings and expressing, you know, I'm not thrilled about this or that, it would be really helpful for us to be able to say, hey, we hear you, and this is your next step and where you should go to with this at the state level, right?
Yeah, I think we can be helpful on that. You know, we'll put together something and send it to you after this meeting, because you're right. I mean, this is like trying to navigate a maze, and it would be nice to have some guidance for people so they don't have to come here to ask us to do something, and then, you know, it would be nice if they had some sort of direct route to get their questions answered from the decision maker, which is at this point Maine DOT.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here.
Our
Phil
pleasure.
and Sarah, and for your presentation. We're going to take a quick 5-minute recess, and then we'll get going right at 7.
Thank you, guys.
Right, and congratulations to the new counselors.
Thank you.
Well done, and existing counselors. So, thanks a lot.